of the 2021-22 municipal year. Can I just very quickly say it's great to see you all in person in the real world. I don't think I've seen this many people in the chamber for some time, and very good to see some of you I've not seen for a very long time in the real world. I think Anne-Marie was Councillor Rosman, March the 8th you were last here. It's a very, very long year and a bit. My name is Councillor Paul Fives. I'm the leader of the council and the chairman of this executive. I'm supported this evening by a number of officers, the Chief Executive Tom Horwood, Strategic Directors Graham Clark and Annie Wrighton, Head of Policy and Governance Robin Taylor, Borough Solicitor Daniel Bainbridge, and Louise Fleming, the Democratic Services and Business Support Team Manager. If I can start with apologies, have there been any apologies for absence, Louise?
Thank you, Chairman. There have been apologies from Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Members of the Executive, could I ask you to refer to meetings of the Executive on the 30th of March 2021 and the 6th of April? Could you please indicate if you are happy to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Declarations from officers or members, Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. All the members of the senior management team have declared an interest in item 10 and will leave the meeting for the consideration of the HR implications contained in the exempt annex.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations from members at the start of the meeting? Nope, seeing none. Moving to item 4, questions from members of the public. There is one question from a member of the public from Mrs. Cathy Smythe. Can I invite Councillor MacLeod to read the question and respond?
Thank you, Leader. It's a good question from Cathy Smythe. The question is, the page on the Council's website, which sets out the local plan timetable, states that the Council is currently working towards April 2021 as the date for submission of the draft local plan Part 2 to the Secretary of State. But this date has clearly been overshot. So when will Waverly Borough Council be submitting draft plan LPP2 for examination? The answer is that the Council has received over 1,200 separate comments from over 400 respondents when we consulted on a draft of Local Plan Part 2 earlier this year. We are currently considering our responses to the comments and how we will take Local Plan Part 2 forward. We intend to do this and agree a date for submitting the plan for its examination this summer. As soon as we do, the Council will update its timetable and put it on our website. And in the meantime, we'll put a statement of explanation onto the website prior to do that. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Item 5, questions from members. I believe there are no questions, is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Item 6, which is leader and portfolio holders updates. In line with what the administration agreed over the past 2 years, we're going to carry on doing the portfolio holders updates that we've become accustomed to. I want to just very quickly start by firstly welcoming Councillor Mirrlees and Councillor Penny Marriott to the executive formally now that we're all actually back here in person for your first session, so welcome. And I would also like to welcome the new leader of the opposition, Councillor Melina, who's in attendance today in the chamber as well. My own updates before I move on to portfolio holders. Since the transition from Councillor John Ward that took place a couple of months ago now, this is now my first meeting as chairman of the executive. Over that time, I've been holding one-to-one meetings with portfolio holders. I believe I have 2 more remaining to review what we've been doing as an executive, what those portfolio holder roles are, and if there are any significant changes that need to be made to those roles. I'm not foreseeing any drastic changes with those roles, but once we've concluded the process of having those one-to-one meetings, there will be a new list of executive roles and titles that will clarify some of those discrepancies that have built up over the last 2 years. Obviously, you will have also noted the extension of the COVID regulations, which pushed forward into another month. That does obviously have some impact to the work of this council in that we had expected to be able to lawfully hold a full council in this chamber by the time that we got to our meeting on the 6th of July. Obviously, that is now not the case, and I would just want to confirm at this point that Democratic Services are exploring alternative venues both in Waverly and outside of Waverly in order to hold the meeting that we need to have on July the 6th. Finally, and I feel obliged to mention this on behalf of Councillor Williams, who is present on Zoom tonight, but obviously has to give his apologies for this meeting. The government managed to extend their own regulations to allow remote working. We obviously can't. So despite the fact that Councillor Williams is on the Zoom and is otherwise present, he is not legally present at this committee. So I'm afraid I'm not allowed to speak to him, ask him a question, allow him to introduce his item, or in fact do anything meaningful, despite the fact that he is here. I will just repeat that we have obviously submitted our comments to the government in regards to the consultation on remote working, but I'm sure everybody understands that obviously I won't be bringing in members who are only available on the Zoom. They must be present in the chamber rather ridiculously at this point. If I can now circulate to the other portfolio holders, and if I may start with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. Just a few words on 3 items. Firstly, our 2 pool cars belonging to Waverly are now starting to show their age, so I'm pleased to say that we're now looking to introduce at some point soon replacement vehicles which will be electric, and this will also form and support our carbon reduction strategy. Our new custom-built Horizon planning system is now fully operational and starting to make a positive contribution to our planning improvement plan. And finally, as in many of my previous portfolio holder updates, I've spoken about the threat posed to the Council by cyber criminals. So I'm delighted to announce that we have just appointed a new person in the role of Cyber Security Manager. That's all from me, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Again, I'll keep it brief. In terms of planning, there was a very important meeting last night that members attended about the improvement programme for the planning department, and improvement not just in terms of how the planning department is structured, but the systems that they rely on. And we very much hope and expect that this will result in improved service to the developers and the general public in the near future. I mentioned a specific planning matter which I think will be of general interest, that Beaulieu Homes appealed against the decision of the council to install 140 homes at Lower Webburn Lane. The inspector actually refused that appeal, so that isn't good news for the council in terms of it's vindicated the local plan and certainly the Farnham neighbourhood plan. The inspector gave a lot of support to the Farnham neighbourhood plan and the decision. I guess the one bad point actually which we have to point out is the inspector disagreed with the council that we have 4.9 years housing supply, 5-year housing supply, and the inspector's judgment is that we only have 4.26 years 5-year housing supply, which may well have an adverse effect on future planning appeals. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Penny Marriott.
Right. Good evening. It is nice to be back in the chamber again and see people eye to eye. This is a new seat on the executive, and I'm really, really pleased that it's here. When I was mayor, it was something which did exercise my mind, especially because I began with George Floyd and finished a year later, which was also George Floyd. So really, I haven't really done an awful lot apart from research and talk to everyone around. So there's nothing to report, but I am actually working on it, and I will have something to report next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott. And yes, there will be some updates coming around in regards to certain types of training and other aspects coming soon from Councillor Marriott. Councillor Merriweather is next.
Thank you, Leader. Actually, you're going to be hearing enough from me later on with the main points I'd like to make, so nothing at this stage. Thanks.
Thank you, and I should hope we are, otherwise my job will be infinitely more difficult. Councillor Mirrlees.
We're here today to have a look at the SLAs, aren't we? So that's what we're going to introduce. Councillor Kevin Denis wanted to talk about his response to these findings that they had at the ONS meeting, and I think what they had to say actually, and what they reported, are actually things that we should get behind. Do you want to speak first, Councillor Denis?
So apologies, it's just portfolio holder updates.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we'll be looking at these SLAs, and then also the suicide prevention plan that's come before us as well from the ONS committee. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Mirrlees. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. The councillors will have received the consultation on revision of parking charges, and we'll be looking forward to taking that forward in the coming weeks. The SIL committee has completed its first year of activity, and the cycle will restart in September. I'm very grateful to all those who contributed to that, and we look forward to working with the successful bidders in making the projects the success that we all hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Rosman.
I think I remember how to use this. Thank you, Leader, and good evening to members, those present in the room and those in the Zoom meeting, and to any members of the public watching on YouTube. A brief update on housing developments. The redevelopment work has been going on very well. In Badgers Close in Binscombe, the modular homes were delivered on last Wednesday the 16th, and the first tranche of grant funding has been received, which always goes down well. When they're completed, there will be a photo call, and we're hoping to have a chance to go and look round. In Crossway Close in Churt, architects have submitted the planning application for 12 new homes, and board members in the parish will be kept in the loop. The application is currently awaiting validation. Site C, Reserve Matters application was considered and consent granted. A full tender pack issued to shortlisted contractors is due to be returned soon, and demolition of the homes is underway. At Chiddingfold, planning permission has been secured for all 5 sites. The tender pack has been prepared and is due to be issued. Housing officers continue to liaise with residents affected, because that is key for the communication to take place. Site B, a photo call was held and will be featured in the June edition of the Oxford Ridge newsletter. And phase 4 refurbs at Oxford Ridge, 5 properties are to be included as part of the next phase of refurbishment. They've been laser scanned for the measurements and a building surveyor appointed. Whereas previous refurbishment phases had enhanced energy efficiency as one of the factors, there will be further assessments and modelling using the new addition to software held by Asset Management, and I've seen that. I've had a demonstration of how that will work, and it's really interesting and should be quite good at delving into the detail. We plan to use the renewable energy sources in the next phase, looking to deliver some exemplar retrofit homes, and when complete, the final spec of the work should be those to be used to procure works on other properties in the borough. Springfield Elstead, the design team has been appointed, surveys have been commissioned, and again housing officers are liaising with the tenants affected. In Petticoat Close, which I think is a lovely name, in Whitley, the 3 new homes which were developed by Langham, which we've taken, have been handed over. In terms of repairs and maintenance, complaints are down and compliments are going up, which I'm pleased to report, and the housing strategy work is continuing. The new design build has been completed by Housing ONS and will be brought forward for consideration by ourselves and full council shortly, and I would like to thank the members of the working group for all their hard work on this area. In community safety, we now have 3 community trigger panels meeting regarding ASB and neighbours. So having had none, we've got 3 coming along together. And please, can all members keep an eye open, because there will be an invite to a briefing on community safety. So that is on its way, coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosman. And last but not least, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader, and very nice to be in the chamber. Just got a couple of things. First of all, I have to mention Frensham, as most of you probably know. Not this weekend, but the weekend before there was quite a number of issues. We did have a huge number of visitors, over 5,000 cars in our own car park, but obviously again lots of people parking on the newly installed double yellow lines which we had put in, and there were some penalty notices issued. However, the amount of litter again was huge, but more worryingly was the behaviour towards our staff. We had a number of staff verbally abused and also one member of staff who was actually assaulted. So I just want to stress there's a zero tolerance for this. We do have the police involved. The stakeholder group has already met, and we're looking into a number of other actions that we can put in place on the site, including additional enforcement, parking enforcement that is, and also additional marshals as well as a number of actions on parking control as well that we're looking into. So we have made huge inroads on the parking control. I already mentioned the double yellow lines. We've put in a whole load of posts to stop people parking, but it is an ongoing issue, but we are going to put in some additional things as well to try and make it more agreeable for our staff and also for visitors on the site. So the other thing is probably just the Economic Development Action Plan continues to go forward. We're at the moment handing it out, or we've just received applications for the Welcome Back Fund. So we've got about, I think it's 32 activities planned for that, but things like planters, paint the bollards in Cranley, and other sort of street furniture and things. So we've applied for the full amount, which is just over 111,000, and we're just waiting for the offer letter for that, and then we can get going on some of the high street improvements to welcome visitors back to the high street. We're also doing a whole load of business support training at the moment, and also working with the leisure sector, which has been particularly hard hit, and also the film sector. And we've just started work on our connectivity strategy, and we will be talking to consultants next week, and we're also working with Surrey Uni on that, and they're going to be doing some connectivity webinars for us for local businesses as well. Very busy time, and that's my update for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. So moving on to the rest of the primary part of the agenda, starting at item 7, which is the mental health report from the Community ONS Committee. Councillor Mirrlees is to introduce this, and then I've got 3 speakers registered. Councillor Mirrlees.
Yes, we were given by the ONS Committee a desire to look at the suicide prevention plan, and I think that is what Kevin Denis would like to talk about now.
Thank you, members. I'll just draw your attention to section 2, which is the recommendations that have been put forward before I move to the speakers. Councillor Denis, you're registered to speak.
Thank you, Leader. The report sets out a number of steps which Community Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny believes the Council should take to deliver its corporate objective to support the most vulnerable in our communities, and particularly those experiencing social isolation, loneliness and poor mental health. Inspired both by a request from Surrey County Council as a public health authority and Councillor Foraszewski's work with local charities and organisations during her term as Mayor to raise awareness of mental health and suicide, includes a suicide prevention strategy showing how, as a provider of services, as an employer and as a community leader, Waverly Borough Council can act to save lives. In these same capacities, Waverly can also act to raise awareness across our community of the mental health support and advice networks which are available. The Community Wellbeing Committee's view is that while there will have a resource implication in terms of officer time, it is unlikely that either recommendation will generate significant financial pressures. And given the centrality of this issue to the welfare of our residents, it is important that Waverley does its part to protect and promote health of our residents. As I've mentioned, Leader, finance is minimal, but the impact is huge and widespread. Waverley needs to lead by example, demonstrate that we put our community's mental health at the top of our agenda. I'm very proud to have been putting these strategies before the executive, but it'd be amiss of me not to mention the dedication and hard work of a number of individuals, including Councillor Foraszewski, Louise Norrie and Mark Mills. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Dinas. Councillor Hyman is next to speak.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, at 10:30 this morning I phoned up because the suicide prevention plan wasn't in the committee papers. Residents might be disappointed to find that. Disappointed that nobody had noticed it, nobody had read the papers. Obviously the portfolio holder and others had. I appreciate seeing it at the ONS as it went through ONS, but it does worry me in such circumstances where obviously it looks like we're making decisions here as a council, with the decisions all made in advance because everyone's going to vote it through despite the fact that they haven't read it. We didn't have a suicide prevention plan, but to make up for that at item 11, Leader, we're advising everybody to take the jump. So we're going to be running around telling everybody to jump. You really couldn't make it up, could you, Chairman? But this is a very, very serious matter. I have some experience myself with these issues. I have represented parties in mental health tribunals on a number of occasions. I did at some point get to know the ICD-10 Blue Book backwards. I've probably forgotten more of it than I can remember. This is, to my mind, quite alarming that we are going to be taking on something which it should be left to the professionals. I appreciate the well-meaning behind it, but if we go to page 29 of our report in front of us at paragraph 4.13, the fourth line down says, mental health issues are currently the leading cause of staff absence. We're going to get staff to become experts in mental health issues, it appears. We're going to give them suicide intervention training on page 30. That's over the page. We've got a blue triangle, the middle one, suicide intervention training for people working frontline services and with high-risk groups. The whole thing here looks, to me, to be something we should really not be getting involved in because there already are mental health workers, care workers, people who are qualified, who have undergone a lot of training. Our staff have got jobs to do. I think our residents have put up with enough already, and the idea that our staff have got time to go off and take on other jobs at the same time, perhaps I would assume it's at some additional cost to us, certainly the training, they might be expected to be paid more as well. I think this is possibly a dangerous way to go forward. I think anyone looking at this, a professional from the health services looking at this, might consider that they would diagnose the council as presenting as delusional, comorbid with narcissistic tendencies. I really can't agree with what's going on. I can't agree with the second recommendation. They say it's not our job, leave it to the professionals. But in Annex 2, which we now have on the second supplement sheet on page 5, that's the one without any pink papers attached to it for people with a hard copy in front of them. At 2.1 it says workforce development, ensure that percentage staff trained and 6 steps to well-being, etc. And we've got points 2 and 3 again, ensure percentage staff trained. There aren't any numbers in there. That's not a plan, is it? So we can't adopt it without any numbers. I would urge you not to, and perhaps to, as you only received the document at lunchtime today, and some won't have had a chance to look through and really think about it, I think perhaps you should put it off to another day. We've got a big agenda, Chairman. I think this has to be taken extremely seriously. If we've got a majority of the people who are at Waverly, our staff who have had problems during the past 12 or 15 months, if they have mental health difficulties, I would ask how many of those have self-referred to mental health services, how many have been sectioned, or is this just people saying they've got mental health problems? I specifically want to know, how serious are these mental health problems that our staff have? Is it being caused by Waverley driving people mad? I know that one well enough. We ought to be getting on with our job and not taking on the job that professionals are already doing and which they've got enough problems with delivering properly. For us to take it on in the situation we're in, I think is delusional. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Before I bring in Councillor Baker as the final speaker, I would just highlight that although the website copy didn't contain that part, the executive has had a copy that does contain that, and we have had it for some time. Several members of the executive, including myself, were also present at every single ONS session that discussed this, so I do not feel that we aren't informed about it, and I just wanted to correct that for the record before I move to Councillor Baker. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be in the council chamber. I'm not very pleased about the reason that has brought me in. I do have to take a few deep breaths, forgive me. I was unhappy about the late arrival of the suicide prevention plan, but it alerted me to what had been going on in the Community Wellbeing ONS Committee. That committee seems to have been looking at mental health for some time now, and Councillor Dinas did hark back to Mayor who was in place in February 2020 when she announced her particular charities, one of which was men's mental health. And I believe that was prompted by a suicide by a resident of Whitley. At that meeting, I announced, and it doesn't get much more public than full council, that my son had committed suicide and that I very much supported what Mayor Forojewski was doing. And I certainly continue to support all initiatives to prevent suicide. What I'm surprised about is that, forgive me for taking my time, it's an effort. What I'm surprised about is that nobody on the Community and Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee thought to call me as a witness. And I'd like to tell you that, first of all, this announcement was heard by everybody in the chamber on the 18th of February 2020, which happened to be my son's 50th birthday. I know Councillor Townsend did, and others who came over to me afterwards. The reason why it would have been so valuable for me to have been called as a witness to that is because my son was employed by a local authority as a solicitor, and that was to the London Borough of Southwark. And here we are now considering an executive recommendation about what we as Waverly Borough should be doing to help people who have mental health problems and indeed may be in distress. So I thoroughly disagree with what Councillor Harman has just said. We need everybody to be aware of our friends and colleagues with whom we work, and to know and to be ready to pick up on the sort of symptoms that they may display. And of course, the very sad thing is that people with mental health problems intending to commit suicide do not always convey their intentions to anybody. And indeed, I have a neighbour in Hambledon whose son committed suicide about 2 years ago, and she had no idea that this was going to happen. And they had a close relationship. My own son sadly suffered from psychosis. I do have the compensation of knowing that he was deranged at the time he took his own life. That is what enables me to carry on and to speak out about this in public. And even now, it's an effort. So, I would like to say, I don't know why somebody in the scrutiny committee didn't pick up on my willingness to talk about this and the fact that I had something to offer. And I will just add to that that my son died at Whitley Station, which is in Waverly. And since I see here in the draft suicide prevention plan that there is a priority to reduce access by promoting suicide-safer communities and for public health to alert Waverly if there's an emerging high-risk location. Now, I know that long before my son died at Whitley Station, and I have to add, he did not throw himself under a train, but there had been a history of certainly one person jumping off the bridge in front of the train at Whitley Station. So I just give you that as an example of the sort of information that needs to be known. And let's hope it never happens again. It was a long time ago, but we need to be aware. And I'm speaking at length. Forgive me, but you can tell how much it matters to me. And indeed, my reaction after my son's death was to become a member of the Surrey Link, which was the predecessor to Health Watch. And I chaired the Mental Health Committee of the Surrey Link for a time and was very active and campaigned for the mental health crisis line to be promoted properly in doctors' surgeries. I could tell you an awful lot about this, but I think I'd better stop there with my own experience. And just to say that, finally, Leader, sorry to go on, but I have been banging on, it is the only word to use, at the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee about mental health, particularly in our tenants. And I don't see any reference to our tenants here. Now, maybe you will say, well, this covers everybody in Waverly, and indeed it should. But we were promised a report on mental health at that scrutiny committee in June. It is even referred to in the reports that have informed these recommendations. And that item was bumped. And that was really, I think, because the June committee was looking at the previous year's stats for housing, and that, of course, is quite, does require weighty consideration. But nevertheless, when this particular item is coming to the executive now, I don't know why housing scrutiny input wasn't got ready in time to inform these particular recommendations. Personally, I think there is an argument to be made for pulling this, but I defer to the leader because in his wisdom he will have to decide, and indeed maybe Councillor Rosamond, where we go from here. Because if this is as urgent as I think it is, in spite of what Councillor Harman has said, then maybe it needs to be got on with. Thank you, Leader, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, and I know I'm not the only one who will say that admire your courage for speaking up about this in the council chamber. It's not the easiest thing for anybody to do, particularly if it's impacted them personally. I think the comment I would just make here is that whatever we agree to at the end of this, it's not the end of the discussion, and I agree with you in terms of getting on with things, but if we pass this in its current form, there will still be more discussion. There's ways that we can change it and add to it and develop it going forward. So from my point of view, I think there is value in passing what we have and thinking about what we can then add to it later. I would like to just ask Councillor Rosman if you wouldn't mind just commenting on the housing side, because I think that's probably quite important to this one.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Again, thank you, Councillor Baker. That was incredibly moving, and I admire your strength tonight. And sadly, I think probably a lot of us here have had experience. I lost a friend to suicide as a teenager. And I would just say that, first of all, in terms of our staff, I know that Sally in particular has done a lot to reach out to provide mental health support to the staff of Waverly, because obviously during COVID there's been lots of anxiety and other issues. In terms of staff training, housing officers who are the frontline staff who do go out are very well aware of what to look for, but anything that takes that training further to make them more aware. And in 4.16, it does say one of the ways Waverley can help in suicide prevention is to train staff in frontline services to become more aware of this issue. It's not becoming an expert, it's listening out for those learning signs. So in terms of housing, the support to our tenants, they are, the officers I've spoken to are incredibly good at listening to tenants and perhaps flagging up when things aren't quite going the right way and whether further agencies need to be involved. I know this is something that Councillor Seaborne's brought up at ONS in housing on a number of occasions, and it's something that's on a regular basis discussed with the heads of housing by myself. If in doing this we can just help one person, you know, it's going to be worth it, because one person, that life is well worth saving. So I would suggest that we do continue along the track, and I would very much suggest that we do draw on experiences of those who've been through it and things that would help, because talking about it is the first thing to being able to help anybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osman. Just to respond to a couple of the points Councillor Hyman made as well. A lot of the discussion I had when I attended that ONS was actually about some of the points that you were discussing in regards to, was it our remit and were we funded to cover this, and what aspects were our job as an authority to do. The sections that stuck with me are the areas in which Waverley is uniquely placed to signpost our residents, particularly as tenants or as users of our services, in order to ensure that they reach those services, but also how we then think about and protect our own staff in exactly the sorts of ways that Councillor Baker was talking about, which is one of the reasons why I'm very happy that this has come through that process following all of that very constructive discussion and is here before you tonight. Are there any other members wishing to speak on this item? Okay. Seeing none, the recommendation is listed in item 2, so for the benefit of the... Can I ask whoever's unmuted to mute? Thank you. The recommendation as in the papers, it is recommended that Committee A note the reports and need to raise awareness through all sections of the community of the mental health support and advice networks that are available to Waverley staff and residents. Part B, commend the adoption of the draft suicide prevention plan for Waverley to the Executive. And C, work together with the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee to share good practice for staff and residents. So just to be clear, that is a formal part of the recommendation to engage with housing. We haven't done this in a little while, but I'm going to have to ask all members to show their hands to vote rather than press a little green or red button. So members in favour of the recommendations, please could you show your hands? Thank you. I believe that's passed. Thank you. I can now confirm that the timer that just unfortunately wasn't working for that last item is now working again, and so there's of course a 4-minute timer on speeches. So item 8, SLA working group. Councillor Miralles, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, this is looking at the SLA working group to decide about commissioning and how we might look at the groups that we have got at the moment, and how we're going to look at them in the future, because we feel, because things have changed quite a lot, there's quite a lot to be reorganised and readdressed, and I think reinvigorated. So I know that Councillor Denis wants to speak on this as well, so I'm going to let you do that and then have a talk about it afterwards.
Thank you, Councillor Murrays. I have got two speakers, starting with Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Leader. Like much else, the preparation of this report has been disrupted by COVID-19. And the Community Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny are grateful for the stability and space provided by the one-year extension to the existing service level agreements. However, we are now clear there must be a thoroughgoing changes to SLAs. COVID has reminded us all of the vital contribution for the not-for-profit sector makes to the wellbeing of Waverly. And we need an evidence-based approach to see how the council can best support them, whilst also considering how the grant programme delivers value for money. The Overview and Scrutiny Task and Finish Group set out to complement the work being done by the Executive Working Group on the same subject. Therefore, at the core of this report is a set of principles and priorities which they hope will underpin that group's eventual recommendations. The Task and Finish Group look forward to examining these recommendations soon. I know that every member of the group is acutely aware that an organisation's ability to form their business plans depend on information about their future finances, and therefore are keen to see this review proceed at pace. I think the report says everything else, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Councillor Hyman.
Wasn't me. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Leader. Absolutely support the idea that the direction I think that the portfolio holder is taking us here, that we need to review this. It is quite some time that we've been under the current system, and we've got changing times, certainly. We need to bring in young people. We need to make buildings self-supporting. We've got some very difficult decisions that are going to have to be made regarding funding, but we cannot assume now. I mean, I know that some of our day centres have, I think we've been paying everybody, or just about all. We've hardly done any furloughing, but I think all of the day centres have been staffed, and of course we've been doing odds and producing meals and that sort of thing, but with very, very few people attending them, and from what I hear, we're not going to be getting the same sort of number of people wanting to go back to them and eating together communally. So, you know, there are going to be reasons for us changing our systems. I do think if we look at the priorities that have been put there, I'm a little concerned that the first priority is, because it says that basically that any bids have got to demonstrate that they will support the corporate priorities and corporate objectives. Unfortunately, our corporate objectives, you know, are very high level. They're motherhood and apple pie, or, you know, something for everybody in there. I think you could just about make a case for anything to be within those, so we're going to have to be very strict on that. And I think if you were to take it on a sensible level, that might mean, for instance, that arts, crafts, maltings, Cranley won't necessarily be able to get the same sort of funding in future. I'd like to know whether that is the case, exactly, you know, what would be more likely to get funding and what wouldn't. I think we all accept things probably will have to change over time, but I didn't get answers to my questions I asked under the last point, obviously, but it would be nice if perhaps we do get an answer. What does it actually mean for us at the moment, the direction that this is going to go in terms of the people that we've currently got, you know, and what we're doing with our day centres, that sort of thing? Have we thought thought that far ahead, because we've made mistakes in the past. We haven't been very good. We did a terrible job with Rowley's. We had set up Age Concern Waverly, and then gave the money over. I think 50 grand it cost us some years ago, and then we passed the money over to Guildford, and of course Age Concern Surrey. They don't provide many services in Waverley. I mean, things have gone completely wrong, and we've been wasting money there, to my mind. But we do need to be careful with how we're spending the money that we have got available for these organisations, and we certainly need to make sure that the youngsters are getting a look in now, as well as the elderly, who are probably more able or better able to pay a few quids to go to the crafts centre or whatever it happens to be, and help support those things in different ways, and make some of the older organisations perhaps more self-supporting. But it's going to be difficult. There are some difficult decisions to come up with this. I understand that, and I think everybody understands that. But if we could have a little bit of clarification, please, exactly on what the corporate priorities issue really means for organisations, because I think that's a bit woolly. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Before I open it up to debate amongst the executive, I firstly just want to say thank you to all of our SLA organisations for all the work that they've done during this particularly difficult period. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do to extend the current system to allow maximum stability for those organisations to function. But obviously, whilst we've been thinking about that, we also have wanted to look at how that system works and how we manage those increasingly scarce resources appropriately, including, for example, a greater focus on areas of the community that haven't had a very significant focus from Waverley, such as young people who just have not. I would just respond very briefly to Councillor Hyman that the recommendations here ask us to note a set of priorities. It wouldn't be proper for me to preempt the work and outcomes of the executive working group on this subject, who will take those priorities, will note them, and will then come out with recommendations as to how we actually progress. So it's not for me to direct that group and their work, and therefore I can't actually respond to your question at present, Councillor Hyman, but I'm sure you'll take an interest in how that group works as it does its job. I'll open that up now to other members to comment on this item. Councillor Mirrlees.
I think it's a golden opportunity, actually, although it may not seem to for some people, but in actual fact, some of the models are very old-fashioned and they're not fit for purpose, which means that we can look at the ones that work. And I do think that in certain communities, certain models do work, and they hold that, that culture that works for them. But in other places, that hasn't been happening. And I can see, I talked to Katie Webb quite a lot about how we could look at changing things so people benefit much more. I think their needs are different, and obviously different parts of our borough require different provisions. And I think there's actually quite a good opportunity for us to open it up to different organisations, find out what needs working, what can work, what can change to benefit the people, and to, as Paul says, take it to the youth as well as the elderly. And I actually feel very positive about this. I think that it's important to keep a 3-year term. I don't think an annual one is any good at all. And I think that if we can, we have quite a lot of opportunities to actually invigorate this quite well. And I feel, for example, in some places you have a sort of element towards older people as well, that they should be segregated off and go to places where they're not actually part of our community. And I can see ways of doing that by, for example, if I can make an example of an idea of rather than bunging some people in a place where they all go and then they all eat together and do that and then they go home, that they actually go to somewhere to do an activity. We keep an eye on that pilot activity, see how many people are coming and going to it and whether it's working. But then they can actually come out of that, either go home if they want, but actually, eat at the place they are and meet other people who are in the community who are all part from different age groups. So I see that as a way of integrating us much more. I think there's lots of ideas around this, and I think that I am very grateful, and I think we all are, to the people who've been working so hard during this last period of time. And certainly there were ones that didn't work so well, didn't manage so well, and others who really picked up the tab. So I actually think this is a good way of revitalising the organisations that help us, and it means that we can move into other areas as well. Okay, thanks.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Anybody else? No, in which case I'll move to the recommendations. Here there's two recommendations that I propose we take together. 2.1, that the Executive asks its working group to ensure that its proposals reflect the principles and recommendations as outlined in Annex 1. And 2.2, that the Council should retain a 6-month notice period for informing not-for-profit partners of any changes to the service level agreements. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Moving now on to, bear with me one second, item 9, which is the Local Government Boundary Commission Boundary Review Warding Pattern Submission. Bear with me one sec. You'll be aware, all of you, I'm sure, that the electoral review of Waverly Borough Council began in 2020. As ever, I remind members to direct their ire at having to go through this process during what remains of a pandemic at the place where it properly belongs, which is at the government, for not stopping this, rather than the Boundary Commission or its commissioners themselves. They have obviously been going through a process now since part of 2020. We have obviously recommended to them a number of councillors level at 50. Oh. Should be okay to go? Yep, good. The Boundary Commission itself has a responsibility to draft warding patterns and proposals that go out for consultation. Although Waverly is not obligated to take part in that process or assist in any way, we wanted to ensure that there was a balance of resource put into this from officers, but also that we did give some level of opinion as to what the ward boundaries might be. And that sounded like a sensible thing to do. It is also what the cross-party group assembled to discuss the Boundary Commission wanted to do as part of their work. And certainly, if we can have a pan-Waverley submission, I think that would be beneficial to us all. I've got a number of speakers on this item. Bear with me one sec. Oh, no, apologies. No, this is the one without any speakers. Any other members wanting to speak on Local Government Boundary Commission proposals? Particularly those who sat on the group, if there are any others here. Okay, in which case stunned silence will bring us to the recommendations. So the recommendation is that the Executive recommends to full Council that Waverley makes a submission on future warding patterns to the Local Government Boundary Commission for England, comprising of option 2 on Annex 1 and illustrated in Annex 2, plus the qualitative comments on warding issues set out in Annex 3. Have all those in favour, please show. Thank you. Okay. And now the main event, one of the two main events of the evening, I'm sure. Item 10, options for collaboration with Guildford. Please bear with me a second while I get my multiple screens to the right place. And senior officers are leaving the room. Louise, can I confirm that officers are also meant to leave Zoom as well? There we go. Thank you. Right. Members will be aware that we have started on a potential journey of closer collaboration with Guildford Borough Council in order to address our budget deficit and other challenges related to our funding situation from central government. You will have noted in the report a number of possible options which a number of us have discussed at length over the past few months, and we've now brought to Executive to set a direction. The bit I'm just going to bring members back to is recommendations under Part 2. effectively we need to not just pick one of the models, but if we need to change them in any way or modify them to adapt where we are in this process, that's really the opportunity to do so. I'm going to move to the speakers who have registered, but before I do so, I've circulated an amendment around the executive members who hopefully should have a copy, and if not, we will put it up on the screen when we get to that point, elaborating on one of the options to potentially progress. For the moment, though, I will move to the speakers list, which starts with Councillor Stephen Melina.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going to rehearse what I said at the presentation because that obviously was a private meeting. I think the most obvious first glance at the proposals is that the savings are not quite as large as I was hoping they would be. Had these proposals encompassed a 20% reduction in costs, this would have been something which one would have recognised immediately as having enormous import. These, however, suggest a total between the two councils of savings of £1.4 million per annum, which in the context of gross spending of round about 90 million, and larger numbers if you use different measures, shows that it's a relatively small contribution. And indeed, Guildford recognised that if the savings are realised, it'll only be about a third of what they need to find in total. So the first thing I would like to request is that we get complete clarity on the savings. The estimates from local partnerships are simply those, and so a very important early step is to make sure that this is achievable. The second thing is that we, as Waverly, have our medium-term financial strategy. I do not believe we expect that every number in that is cast in stone. It is a forecast after all. And so the next matter we need to be clear about is whether these claimed savings, which might be for us as a smaller council, approximately 500,000 a year, will be enough to solve our problems. Obviously, if they're not, other measures will have to be considered, and then it may be sensible to wonder whether the other measures, perhaps expanded and taken on their own, would be a suitable answer, and the disruption and hidden possible costs of collaboration might cause the savings we expect from collaboration to be less than we hope. And my last point is to ask that the inter-authority agreement, which will regulate how the two councils work together and how savings will be shared, should be seen in draft as early as possible in the process, as that will be a way of assuring people, particularly ourselves in the smaller council, that the proposals can actually work. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Melina. Councillor Hyman is next registered to speak.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. Thanks to Councillor Melina. Excuse me. Thanks to Councillor Melina for what he said there, because that pretty much encompasses my own concerns too, but he's put it so much better. I have a further concern, obviously, that what we have to be very careful to make sure that this is something which is going to do a job for us, other than simply being some something to wave in the face of Surrey County Council if they're pushing for unitaries. I mean, you know, if Surrey County Council were to look at unitaries, obviously, if we were in some sort of tight and extremely efficient arrangement with Guildford, that would help. The problem is that we could spend a load of money on going into a reorganisation and cause a lot of upsets amongst staff and whatever. And certainly the systems and where we go for meetings, all sorts of different things are completely up in the air at the moment. would those pay off or not? The savings that are being talked about at the moment really aren't enough, as far as I can see, to justify the amount of work that will be involved, because we're paying people to do the work and it's going to take a considerable amount of time. I would echo the concerns of Councillor Melina in respect of the agreements between the two councils. I will reiterate what I said at the briefing in respect of the need for us to have both parties, both councils, to agree to a duty of candour. Guildford have got worse financial problems than we have, but nevertheless we have to go in this. I mean, it's a legal principle that comes from 1986 from, I think it was Huddleston case, of candour, as well as an NHS having put it in place through Jeremy Hunt actually after the North Staffordshire hospital problems a few years ago. So this is something where if you end up in courts, the duty of candour applies. The courts don't always work it properly, but it does apply in law. And we should ensure that we've got that as part of our constitution in advance, as should Guildford, so that both parties know that actually we're being held responsible if we are not entirely open with the other party. So I would want to make sure that that is within the agreement, and we'd certainly want to see the agreement before any sort of decision was made. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hyman. Before I bring in everybody else, I think the couple of points I would just want to focus on, if the cars of Godalming will let us speak without intrusion. There is risk in inaction as much as there is in action. We will have to find the money that we're attempting to save through this process by one means or another. It's my recollection that the budgetary strategy working group did not find some of the savings that we are talking about here for us to seek as an alternative. So we will need to do something. The something in this question, if we are unable to do this with Guildford Borough Council, is probably localised cuts to services, because that is the only other way we would be able to recoup that kind of saving. So I would just again caution that inaction is not necessarily an option that is without any risk in its own right. The second thing I would just flag is that, as well as this being an opportunity for us to make some savings, there is also significant opportunities for us to do more together than we could do alone. And I think a significant part of what we want to do here is be greater than the sum of our parts and try to achieve not just savings, but genuine expansions and improvements to services for residents both in Waverly and in Guildford. So there is a financial driver that got us to the table, but there are very much other reasons why we are here and looking at this in the depth that we are. I'll now open it up to the rest of the executive. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's all perfectly consistent. I think with the duty of candour, if there is such a thing, there is a responsibility not to speculate or scaremonger, and the whole purpose of what we are embarking on now is to do the research and to do the diligence and do the discovery that will inform a decision. It's disappointing, but perhaps not surprising, that the preliminary tentative analysis has been underwhelming, as Councillor Melina described it the other night. But it's still, even based on that analysis, which has yet to be checked, suggests it could be maybe the largest single contributor to closing our budget gap. So it shouldn't be dismissed as being not worth looking at.
And would I be right in saying that also it does not prevent either council from pursuing other savings opportunities exclusively within its own domain and with its own authority?
Quite right. Should complement that.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Any other speakers on this subject? So looking at the actual options that are before us, there are sort of generic options presented A through F, which start from an option to do nothing, which I'm proposing off the bat is an unacceptable option for us, in that we are at no point looking at another option to save us the money that we're looking at here, and previous attempts to do so by groups convened by the council have not been forthcoming. Option B is to commission further research with a defined scope. I'm proposing at this point that unless somebody has got particular defined activities they would like us to focus on, that this is kicking it down the road without making a stand or putting a direction in place. So in practice, we've got 4 options: shared services, shared headquarters, single management team and single staffing team, all of which are fairly clear in what they decide to do in terms of a direction. My proposal would be that in terms of option E, a single management team, that we refine this slightly to a single chief executive for both councils, where that chief executive would then be obligated to find a new single management team and to conduct that process as they see fit. I have been in discussion with Councillor Clark and with South East employers and a number of other bodies and other members of the Democratic Services team to come up with an expansion to option E, which alleviates what I believe to be an information gap in us coming to any kind of decision on this. And I'd ask at this point, Louise, if it would be possible to put the wording of that proposed recommendation on the board. I'm just going to take 2 minutes for members to read and absorb this. I will apologise that I was only able to get my session with South East employers this morning, otherwise this would have been drafted earlier and circulated, but that is on me.
Yeah, if you could read it out, it would be handy. I don't know whether the people at home can read this on the webcast, but I think if we've got recommendations, they should be at the beginning.
Okay, the executive resolves to 1. Ask South East employers to provide, in time for the publication of the 6th of July council agenda papers, additional data in respect to the potential financial implications of appointing a single joint chief executive acting as head of paid service for both Waverly and Guildford Borough councils, and to advise on cost sharing arrangements. And, subject to the receipt of financial and cost sharing data and advice from South East employers, any advice issued by the council's chief finance officer or his appointed deputy relating to the level of approval required, how any costs would be funded, and the appropriateness of any cost sharing agreement. The executive resolves to commend to full council. 2, that full council pursues the option of creating a single management team comprised of statutory officers, head of paid service, chief financial officer and monitoring officer, directors and heads of service as the most appropriate means for bringing forward business cases for future collaboration. And that full council asks the council's HR manager to take the necessary action in consultation with Guildford Borough Council and with the support and advice from South East employers, and as set out within the addendum to Annex 3 of this report, to make arrangements and for the recruitment and selection. And could you scroll it down slightly, Louise, sorry. Of a single joint chief executive acting as head of paid service for both Guildford and Waverley Borough Councils, including making arrangements for a senior officer recruitment panel to include the leader of the principal opposition group and council leader, so that a report may be brought to a future meeting of full council recommending the appointment of a suitable candidate. I've brought this forward because I believe a single management team option is probably the most viable way that we can pursue what we're trying to do here. But equally, the option as outlined in the original agenda papers does not give enough detail. And my request to executive here is that we adopt this recommendation because it in principle sets that direction, but allows for a full report that we have now commissioned to be brought in time for the full council debate, on the 6th of July. So that is what I've presented here for discussion. Hopefully people have had enough time to absorb that. Are there any comments or questions on this version? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I think, as Councillor Melina said, previously and has been reiterated by Councillor Merriweather, we were all a bit disappointed with the previous report, and we can see that more information is required, and I think that this definitely provides that additional data that we need about looking at the cost sharing arrangements for us both, and also obviously provides far more information about the method of bringing our two teams together. But it doesn't actually make a decision. So, we're just looking at getting more information, and I think that that's appropriate. Thank you.
The purpose of this entire debate is for the executive to set a proposed direction to take to full council and explore the means to implement it. I don't believe any of those options without further data were viable, and this does seek to alleviate that. In terms of the actual appointment, Guildford's constitution requires a panel be convened that includes members of the principal opposition group as well as the administration. This is obviously something Waverly does as a matter of custom and practice, although it's not in our constitution, so we would need to align ourselves to that as this sets out. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I think we're likely to be asked if Guildford are going to have a similar resolution at their council meeting and do exactly the same as us or not.
So Guildford's equivalent executive is concurrent with this one, and its full council on July the 6th is concurrent with ours. The advice I've had from officers, because as we've demonstrated here, each council is obviously acting in its own sovereign right based on the debates that it will have with its own members. It was certainly my feeling and Councillor Clark's feeling that members would not wish to pursue a particular direction without some commitment to finding additional information on the subject before we have that debate at full council. It is not incompatible with the vanilla version of E, which is on the agenda papers of Guildford Borough Council. We have circulated that text to Guildford Borough Council should they wish to adopt something similar. But if they adopt the vanilla version of option E, it does not conflict with ours, and we will of course be sharing any information from South East employers with Guildford Borough Council anyway. Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Any other members wishing to speak? So it's my proposal that we adopt that resolution as read and displayed on the screen. Could we just put that back up for members before we come to a vote? Okay. Can I have a show of hands for all those in favour of the resolution as displayed? Thank you, members. That's voted unanimously. Okay, could we ask our officers to return?
Chairman, may I, if treated as a point of order, may I ask that that text is emailed to all members after the meeting?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, in fact, can be done whenever.
And to anybody else who might be interested, press or whatever.
I would suggest that it's emailed to all council groups. I'm sure the press are doing as they usually do and watching the webcast with eagerness, as we all do. Yes, of course.
I must express my astonishment this has been brought to the executive in this way. Have quite a complicated text placed in front of people with, frankly, very little opportunity to take it on board. I'm not entirely clear whether option E is therefore the modified option E is the only option you'll be recommending to full council on the 6th. But I, for one, would have thought that more time for reflection would have been a good idea. This is a very major move for the council, and it's not something we should rush into. And indeed, I understood you on last Wednesday at the briefing that this was very much start of a journey, to use that hackneyed phrase. And coming to a single option from these 7 is something I would have thought would have quite a bit of could benefit from input from the council as a whole, whereas it seems that, if I've got this right, that you're compressing the options to basically a modified option E or nothing. Have I got that right, or am I wrong?
My understanding of the Council's constitution and operating procedures is that full Council can take that recommendation, amend it or accept it at full Council as it wishes to do so. The executive is a policy-making body, and its responsibility is to set policy and decision and direction, which is what it's done here, and to seek further information where it believes so, which is exactly what that recommendation does. The next step on my hackneyed journey was a conversation with South East employers, which I did this morning, and as I've said, it's my apologies that it wasn't able to happen earlier, but it was the first time that could be booked with that outside body to discuss this. So there will be a report from South East employers that fulfills the gap, as I see it, and saw it on option E, to provide that additional information. But it is the executive's job to set a direction and a steer, to seek more information where necessary, and I believe it's done all three of those things. And Council will obviously determine if further options or information is needed as required. Thank you.
Chairman, may I just...
Can I just say, this is not actually an open forum on executive. Because of the seriousness of the subject, I will let you come back this once, and then I'm going on to the next item. Councillor Hyman.
Are we going to be looking at this at an VFM ONS meeting next week? Am I right?
My understanding is that there has been a special ONS convened on the subject, and myself and Councillor Merriweather have been asked to attend that ONS, and we will engage as much as the chair will have us do so.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are we officers all back? Thank you, Louise. Okay, item 11 is Take the Jump, and I will have to just find my papers again. Bear with me. Councillor Williams would have obviously wished to introduce this himself, but obviously he's in Zoom purgatory, so he's unable to represent himself in the way I'm sure he would like to do so. I've also been informed that I'm not able to play the video that I asked him to produce to introduce this, because otherwise I may also be skirting with the boundaries of the law. So in terms of this item here, the Climate Emergency Action Plan compels this council to engage with our community and to seek to assist the community in coming to in trying to engage with our climate emergency and to reduce its own carbon footprint. We have had a number of discussions regarding ways that we could do that, both in council and engaging with our community, and the Environment Department have brought forward the Take the Jump scheme for us to consider here at Executive today. I think the papers are quite clear, and I know that most members of the Executive will have had discussions with Councillor Williams on this. Can I have any members wishing to speak on the recommendations as listed in Part 3? Okay. Seeing none, I'm proposing to take recommendations 3.1 through 3.5 together, unless there's any objections from the floor. Okay, seeing none.
Sorry, Chairman, did I indicate to speak on this?
My apologies, Councillor Hyman, you are entirely correct. Bear with me one sec. Yes, my apologies, Councillor Hyman.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether anybody's read this, but we're on page 95 of the committee papers, I think I'm right. Taking the jump, 1.3 tells us that officers were requested to carry out due diligence on the company, but there is none. There's no background whatsoever. What we are being told is that we are going to encourage and basically shout out, try and get everybody to do the following, and that's at 2.2 at the bottom of page 95. End clutter by keeping products for at least 7 years. Doesn't that increase clutter if nobody throws anything out for 7 years? Does it mean we're not going to be able to buy any Chinese stuff? We're going to be telling people, end clutter by keeping products for at least 7 years. Our advice is also to eat healthy, moving over to a plant-based diet, no waste, healthy amount. That's just common sense. I don't think people need us to tell them that. I think they'll think we're meddling and being silly. Third, holiday local, one flight every 3 years. I hope there's a credit system in this so that I can be owed an awful lot of holidays. I don't know who's going to pay for them, but we are allowed to go on holiday once every 3 years, so I'm going to have to catch up with everybody else. Dress fresh, 3 new items of clothing a year. I don't know whether a sock's an item of clothing. Thank you. I mean, 3 new items of clothing a year. I'm not sure whether that's an increase for the elderly gentleman amongst us or a decrease. But, you know, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Someone's come up with a bright spark idea and everybody thinks, oh, we've got to do this. It's like the no mow May. Don't ask anybody, just do it, and everybody paddles in dog poo in the long grass. It's ridiculous. Travel well if you can, no personal vehicles. How many of us have broken that one tonight? If we must travel by car, switch to an electric car. Who's going to pay? This is, I mean, you know, okay, yeah, you know, in a dream world somewhere, but for me to be running around telling people that this is our policy, 3 new items of clothing a year, please, and that applies to our staff. Who's going to lead by example on this one? And are these an improvement? The whole thing, to me, honestly, I'm not sure anyone's read it. It's just a joke. Change the system, make one life shift to change the system. Could be changing new energy providing to a green supply. Well, yes, great. We can advise people to change to an energy supplier. But the idea that we're saying to people that you've got to take this big jump or whatever, well, who's going to do it first amongst us to lead by example? You know, I mean, keeping all your products for 7 years and cutting out holidays or having more holidays. Clothes, 3 new items of clothing a year. Can we please do something to make this more sensible before we go out and ask people to, you know, to follow our lead when none of us are going to actually be leading by example on this? I appreciate some people do have electric cars and don't have cars, but you know, this to me is just jumping on the bandwagon. People's own pets, you know, I just think that our residents have had enough of this sort of thing. Spending the time and money on this sort of thing. They've got enough common sense. We shouldn't be trying to take over their lives. I just think this should be completely removed from the agenda. I'm ashamed to be part of a council that's bringing this sort of rubbish in front of us.
Not really sure where to start there. I think I probably feel obliged to say, of course, that I'm a member of this council without a car and chose not to renew mine when the opportunity came and use public transport, because that's the sort of thing I was able to do. And this policy here is really just trying to encourage people to take that little extra step to try and improve their own carbon footprint. So far from being ashamed, I think it's a laudable policy, and I shall bring in first Councillor Townsend and then Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I would like to say that, yes, I have read the paper, and yes, I have had a presentation from the particular company that has set up this campaign. And unlike as Councillor Hyman seems to think, these are not legal requirements. They are not, you must only keep products for 7 years, you must only eat a plant-based diet. They are suggestions and little steps that people potentially could make in order to help with the climate emergency. We are not telling people to do anything, we're encouraging them to think about things, and I think that's what our council should be doing. All we are doing is supporting a campaign to try and make the world and our planet a better place, and there is nothing wrong with that, and I firmly support it. I would say that it is encouraging people through a comms process. We're not going to be going around to people's houses and checking that they've only bought 3 items of clothing. I can assure you, we're not rummaging through their wardrobes. We are suggesting that they think sometimes about how many pieces of clothing and items they are buying. It is a simple message, and that's the beauty of Take the Jump. It is a simple message that people will maybe pique someone's decision making, and to think about the planet when they're making those decisions. The recommendation said it's encouraging. There's nothing in that recommendation, Councillor Hyman, that says we are forcing anybody to do anything. And I, for one, am supporting this. Thank you.
For a personal explanation, I made no insinuation or anything whatsoever that we are forcing anybody to do anything.
Fine. Okay.
Or that it was a legal requirement.
The executive tends to operate also, if I can borrow some planning words, on a presumption that the executive have read the papers. And I think in most cases you will see very clearly that the executive have. And on this item, again, we've had a significant number of briefings on this and a briefing from the company in question. So, Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm happy to confirm that I've read the paper and maybe for once read it more clearly than and studied it more closely than Councillor Hyman has. I've got paragraph 2.3 in front of me, which contradicts, I think, almost everything he said. It describes this about overcoming the fear of changing life habits. It's not about naming and shaming people, nor is it about requiring people to take all 6 steps at once. Eating less does not mean requiring everyone to become a vegetarian or a vegan. I'm particularly interested in number 4, dress fresh, which means apparently I'm now going to have to buy 2 more items of clothing a year than I normally do, which for me is a win. So I thank you very much.
Yes, I'm finding the don't eat as much during lockdown to be rather challenging myself as well. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much. Every council that's adopted a climate emergency motion faces 2 kinds of challenge. There are the people who say that it's a meaningless form of words and we aren't really going to change anything. And the people who say when we try to do something that it's really far too much and totally unreasonable and an imposition on the right of individuals to decide their lifestyle. I think recognising the limits of what Waverly can reasonably achieve, what our residents can expect is firstly that we review our own policies as we do to see whether in each case they can be improved from the point of view of the climate emergency and of carbon emissions and the associated issues. And secondly, to draw the attention of people who work for the council and for the wider community to possibilities with which they can reduce their impact on the climate and thereby contribute to reducing the emergency. And I think that most people would feel that's a reasonable balance. It's quite common that they will say, I'd like to help, but I don't really know how. I don't know what I can do. And I wouldn't argue that this particular set of proposals is uniquely good. There are other sets of proposals out there, and we could spend many happy hours debating which particular one is most suitable for recommending to residents. But really the point of this exercise is to encourage people to have a think. And yeah, I drove here this evening. I don't have a good alternative option. But I do think before I drive whether there are alternatives. And it's papers of this kind that encourage me to review my own practices. And I think we all need to do that. And in the same way, if Councillor Hyman is ashamed of being a member of the council, there is always the option of a by-election. Thank you.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Hyman was asking if we were going to show an example. And we did have a presentation in this arranged by Councillor Williams, and we were all asked to score ourselves on these things. And I'm delighted to say that I did slightly better than Councillor Williams. I was threatening to put it in my election leaflet I was greener than the Green Party, but I didn't actually do it. But just to run through quickly, Jerry, I don't change products more quickly in 7 years if I possibly can help it. I've got many things that are 10 years or more older. I've been forced to do number 2 by my daughter, actually, and by my grandchildren who are threatening to go vegan. I haven't been in a flight for at least 6 years. I can't remember quite how long, but it's at least 6 years, probably longer. Like Councillor Merriweather, I don't buy any new clothing. I've probably got enough clothing to last me for the rest of my life. And such clothing as I do buy, it's not used. It probably comes from a charity shop. I do fail in number 5, I have to admit it. I've still got a car, but I do now drive as little as possible. And like other members here, I wouldn't be here tonight if I could have possibly been on Zoom. And I'm driving much less than I used to. And I'm looking to do something in number 6 as well. And I think most of the other members of the executive scored pretty highly as well. So I think we are going to show this by example, Jerry. And there's nothing compulsive about this. It's just a set of good ideas that we wish to promote. It's no more, no less than that.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. And as he's not here to defend himself, I also scored higher than Councillor Williams too. Councillor Mirrlees.
I think this is all very worthwhile, but I have to say people will find this alien to them. And I don't think Jerry's, he's not that weird to be thinking like this. I know lots of people go, oh my God, what are these people thinking of? And I understand that. It's a huge shift for a lot of people. So I think as we should just say, this is what we could recommend if we could make like a huge change to our environmental, situation. And that it is just a question of encouraging people. But I do think you need to take on board that the general public, for a lot of them, will go, who the hell do they think they are? And I think they will think that. And that's okay, because it's new ideas. It's a whole change, it's a whole shift in the way we perceive things. But just to be aware of that, and I don't think we should be, slightly patronising towards others who haven't got to that point and may never. So I sort of understand Jerry's reaction, but I agree with that we should be doing this. And I'm a bit difficult about the fashion, I have to say.
I think probably it's worth me saying at this point that a lot of that debate mirrors what we had as an executive when we first went through this, and actually a lot of the messaging that comes out from this needs very seriously to take into account that point about not preaching to people, but also taking it seriously. So from my point of view, these things are values that we hold as an executive. We're doing them to completely steal somebody else's speech. We're doing them not because they're easy, but they are hard, and they are things we have to do. So from my point of view, are there any other speakers? Councillor Rosamond and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. I'm actually often being preached at by my daughter, who is very environmentally aware. She never buys new clothes. Lots of her friends have ASOS catalogue or ASOS deliveries daily. She started using an app called Vinted, where she buys second-hand clothes and sells her second-hand clothes. And now she's got quite a lot of her friends doing it. So I don't think we're necessarily saying we're the experts. We're just trying to give people information. And one thing I think we've all learnt during the pandemic is that you couldn't carry on the way we were before. We have become a disposable society. You buy things, they don't last very long. They're not built to last very long, for heaven's sake. And we think about it, when the time came that we were recycling as well as filling landfill, people thought, how do I do this? It's now second nature. So it's just an aspect of life that you can make a small change which can have a huge effect. So I wholeheartedly support it. I don't think we're dictating to anybody, we're just giving ideas. And if it starts a conversation, perhaps it will have that effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. I think it's all about encouragement. These proposals might be alien to our generation, but I suspect that the younger generation might not quite feel them so alien. But I'd just like to announce that I've already donated my 3 items of clothing to Mrs. Clark, giving her 6 items of clothing. Thank you, Leader.
Somewhere in a room on Zoom, Councillor Williams is not helping the carbon footprint by spontaneously combusting and not able to talk in this debate. But are there any other members that want to speak? No, in which case I will bring it to the recommendations, which I'll take as a block unless there are any objections. Okay, seeing none. So the recommendation are that the executive supports the Take the Jump campaign, that Waverley residents to be encouraged to take the jump, that organisations within the public, private and voluntary sectors operating in Waverley be encouraged to roll out Take the Jump seminar to its employees and at Waverley Borough Council to our members, that events be organised in Waverley to encourage people to promote a national Take the Jump launch, and that Take the Jump awareness raising campaign be organised to inform Waverley staff and members who will be invited to try at making at least one shift in the way that they eat, travel or shop. Can I see all those members in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, moving on to item 12, which is capital projects, which I shall pass to Councillor Merriweather to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. So if I can refer you then to pages 101 to 106 of the main pack. As you've read it, I'll be short. As is described in the report, you'll recall the circumstances surrounding the 2021-22 General Fund budget process and the very difficult decisions that we had to take and will continue to have to take in this regard, specifically concerning our own capital projects budget, which this year was the General Fund revenue contributions were cut to 880,000 from over £1 million pre-COVID last year. In order to consider the allocation of the balance of the approved funding for the plethora of eligible bids, a projects coordinating group was formed from the key stakeholders, and this report is the first set of recommendations, being to allocate £198,000 of the £359,000 outstanding balance approved in February. Only the additional items are identified in the Annex 1 in the 2021-22 revenue allocation column of the table, which leaves a revised outstanding balance still of 161,000 to be allocated. We've entered, I believe, a period when demands for funding are even greater than they were pre-COVID, but the funding landscape appears to be contracting and fragmenting and increasingly drip-fed for narrowly prescribed purposes. In the case of some of these projects, we benefited from a one-off grant from Surrey, but of course there's no assurance if or when funding opportunities like that will arise again, if ever. And we've had to take steps to enhance our own capacity to identify and pursue funding as and when it's available, but this step in itself is yet another demand on our revenue budget. So anyway, the project coordinating group will continue to prioritise funding for the remaining bids and allocate the remaining outstanding budget. It's also undertaken a review of our Section 106 allocations and our earmarked reserves for assurance that the projects and funding for them remain current with everything else that's happening in this ever-changing world. Thank you. I commend the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. I have one speaker registered, Councillor Hyman.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, this one I think is very straightforward. It's just a matter of can we make sure that we're not wasting money. On page 103, we've got £25,000 on a Farnham Park cycleway feasibility study. I mean, really, can we please speak to Friends of Farnham Park? Can we look at the bylaws that are in place that prevent cycling in the park? Can we please start from the bottom upwards here rather than spend 25 grand on a feasibility study and then afterwards go out to the public and find out what they say? You know, we really need to save as much money as possible, and I just see all I can see there is 25 grand on a feasibility study and another 25 grand on a Downslink feasibility study. Can we make sure that it's fully justified? Because I haven't seen any papers. We used to have justification within the budget papers of a February time in the budget book. There used to be fully justified expenditure. I haven't seen anything that really justifies that. But then when we turn to the main page, on page 105, the capital, rather than from revenue, the capital projects, we've got Farnham Park path upgrade, £50,000 coming from section 106, it's not clear whether the path upgrade and the cycle path feasibility are linked in any way. The whole thing obviously needs to be done together, and I think we do need to make sure that the public are involved in this, because Farnham Park is a jewel in the crown of this borough, certainly Farnham, and we need to make sure that you know, we're not just following trends and spending a load of money on things that are going to upset people greatly or ruin things for the future. We've got feasibility study of £30,000 coming from Cranley's share of the extra money we've got from the I think that was from removing the second homes allowance that we used to. People who had second homes had a reduction of 50% in their council tax, and we've removed that, and we've now got money, and we give it to Surrey, and Surrey give a bit of it back because they're gaining from it for not doing any work. So it's nice to have that money coming in, but certainly we don't want to be wasting it. We went through Cranley Leisure Centre feasibility study, I'm sure only 2 or 3 years ago. Okay, lighting replacement on Borough Hall and that sort of thing. A Wilmer Hill Pavilion project at £500,000 altogether. That's a lot of money. It's a shame we don't have the Farnham Museum on here. We're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds, willing to, on all sorts of things. But the one responsibility that we've got to look after a place, a legal responsibility to look after and maintain a building, a listed building that's in our management, we seem to be ignoring. There is money here, like £42,000 on Waden Lane, looking at the development of the site. Have we made friends with a load of consultants who we've got to feed a load of money to for doing feasibility studies here? Because, you know, to me, that was looked at years ago. Okay, great to look at doing something with it. It's a place for dog poo and just an informal place for kids to go and paddle in it, I suppose, but it needs an awful lot of money spending on it. I just think if the public look at this and see that we're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds here on feasibility studies alone, you know, how can we seriously say that we're trying to save money? We're going into some deal with Guildford to save money, yet, you know, the numbers in front of them, I think would surprise people. No objection, obviously, to buying another vehicle for the Ranger, oak processionary moth and dieback, but we really should be showing that we're being very careful, and I've got no justification here for these. Thanks. If you can give us that justification, it'd be nice.
Thank you, Councillor Home. My one comment would be that tends to be that feasibility studies come before consultations so that residents aren't presented with impossible options, or all things are presented to residents when we know they're not feasible.
The amount.
I'll refer now to Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, a feasibility study is part of due process to avoid wasting money rather than to waste money itself. Just a couple of corrections. The table that's on page 103 lists the revenue spend out of the Surrey grant, not capital spend. And of course, all of these the money that we got from Surrey, we had to bid for, and we had to justify the spend to Surrey. So it's not Waverly money. We would not have got it if we hadn't bid for it for these particular projects. As far as Wilmer Hill is concerned, the Wilmer Hill project is a capital project. This is an important commitment that we inherited, which wasn't fully funded when we inherited it. It's an important step in the pathway to the delivery of the Way Hill project, and I'm very pleased that we were able to fund it without any contribution, as this table says, from the Waverly taxpayer. The SIL money comes from developers, and the other money, the 300,000, comes from the capital budget for Way Hill. And of course, Farnham Museum, the fundamental problem with the Farnham Museum project is that we are not allowed to spend capital funds on the repair of the Farnham Museum. I've lost count of the number of times we've tried to enforce that point, Farnham Museum would be much more easily resolved if we were allowed to spend capital funds on the repair, but we're not. So that, I'm afraid, is an unfortunate comparison because it doesn't reflect the situation that we're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. That was very clear. Any other members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will move to the recommendation. So it's recommended that the Executive approves the discretionary projects and their proposed funding for the 2021-22 capital programme as listed in Annex 1. Could all members in favour please show? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, moving to item 13, which is the annual review of corporate performance indicators for 21-22. The purpose of the report is to present the changes as proposed for the annual performance reviews. These are the documents that go before ONS. I was able to attend 3 of the 4 of the last cycle in person where they reviewed this, and I know other members of the executive certainly did attend as well to review. There are no listed speakers on this, so I'll just move to the executive for any comments. No, from my point of view, these are quite clear and reflect the discussions that were held at the ONS. So I shall move to the recommendation if there's no other comments. No. Recommendation, it is recommended that the Executive, having considered the comments and the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committees, approves the changes to the set of performance indicators as set out in the table below, starting from the 1st of April 2021. Could all those in favour please show? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, bear with me for a second. So item 14, exclusion of press and public if necessary. It is recommended that pursuant to Procedural Rule 20 and in accordance with Standing Order 100A-4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following items on the grounds that it is likely, in the view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of proceedings, that if members of the public were present during these items, that there would be disclosure of an exempt information as defined by Section 100I of the Act of the description specified in the reports of the revised Part 1, Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. In layman's terms, we need to move the Council to exempt to discuss item